panel. My name is Jasmine Skye. For those of you who weren't in my earlier panel today, I am an aspiring author. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about books and give reviews and also do some cosplay stuff. I am a cosplayer, obviously, but my main passion is writing, so when I consume media of any form, whether it be books or anime or things like that, I tend to think of it from the mindset of a writer, someone who wants to recreate the good elements and avoid the bad elements. So that's kind of where this panel sprung from. I gave it at Say in Japan just a couple months ago, so this is the updated, improved version of that panel, so count yourselves lucky for that. Disclaimer. I'm not an expert. I'm going to feature 5 different anime to kind of talk about the different examples of military structures you'll find in anime, and we can talk about what went well and what wasn't so good about those different structures, and I'm not an expert in them. I know some of them better than others. Some of them I don't really know at all. One of them in particular. I'm also not in the military. I'm not in any armed service like that, so I'm not an expert on that either. But I do have some family members that serve and have served, so I know a little more than some people maybe, but I'm not an expert. And this is just kind of a fun introduction to spark conversation, and the vast majority of this panel, well, maybe not the majority, some of this panel towards the end is really just going to be an open kind of discussion forum. If you're interested to kind of talk over this with me and talk about the aspects of military anime that you like and the aspects that you don't like, because I think that's really fun. So, we're going to talk, first anime is Mobile Suit Gundam. Who here has seen Mobile Suit Gundam, the original? We've got 2. You know more about it than I do, because I have not ever seen it, but I wanted to include one of the original mechas, because mecha is a genre in particular that uses military structure probably 95% of the time, right? So, this is a good example. The original publication for this was 1979. There's been a lot of kind of expansions on the world and reboots and things like that. Here's the fun part of this panel. Who's that mustache? Either of you? Who is it? You want to guess? No. No idea?
Looks like a captain of some sort.
Okay. This is General Rebel. He was the commander-in-chief of the Earth Federation Space Force. Before that, he was a lieutenant general in the Army. One of the things about Mobile Suit Gundam is in the original timeline, we get to see the construction of a military force when need arises for a new type of force. So when it starts, you just have your Army, your Navy, your Air Force, and then suddenly space is a place where war is happening. So they construct a space force that is dedicated to fighting in space. So that's interesting to me, even though I've never seen it, but it's an interesting concept. Set in a future Earth, it's one of the kind of near future, it's kind of sci-fi, kind of near future stories, and supposedly Earth has been united under this one Earth Federation, pretty typical for any science fiction story, and they start creating colonies on other planets and things like that. And eventually the colonies are like, I don't want to be part of this Earth Federation. We're not Earth, we're blah, 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 right? So you start getting war. And that is the cause of the Federation, the EFSF, the Earth Federation Space Force military unit is not the word I'm looking for. Force, just the force, like the whole different section of the military. They're not the Army, they're not the Marines, they're not the Navy, they're not the Air Force. They are their own force. They have their own commander-in-chief. They're separate from the rest, which is interesting. Like I said, is there anything I missed there? That's all information, basically. The general organization of the military for the Mobile Suit Gundam universe, the Earth Federation Forces has the several different factions, the different forces, which pretty much mimic our modern forces with the exception of the created space forces. It is created to be a realistic future of the modern military organization. So, as we'll get to on the next slide, the ranks, the uniforms are all kind of an extension on what already exists in the modern day. The EFSF primarily, so you have your Air Force, which is using a lot of aircraft, and you have your Navy, which might fight a lot on sea, and then your Army, which might fight a lot more over land. In general terms, the EFSS fights in space, but specifically, one of their primary units ends up being these mobile suits with soldiers, again, mecha. So the ranks, again, this is pretty spot on Navy ranking, which makes sense for space because ships, we talked in my earlier panel about how naval strategy and naval organization works really well for spacecrafts as well. They're both different types of ships. So it has that ranking system up from, and this is officer ranks, I should say. This is not talking about just regular enlisted soldiers. No, wait, okay. And then your uniforms. Again, pretty much an extension on the modern Navy uniform. It looks to me, from the screenshots that I saw, that everyone's ranks are on their shoulder. That is one difference. With modern uniforms, often ranks are only on the shoulder for higher officers. So you get ranks on your, this area, whatever this is called, and ranks on your hat. But they do have medals of honor and ribbons, etc., going on the left breast area, very similar to modern day uniforms. So, Mobile Suit Gundam is an example of, I don't want to create my own military organization. I'm going to copy and paste from Wikipedia, United States Navy, and call it good. Is that a good thing? Well, it's definitely organized in some functional way. Is that a bad thing? It's not creative, yeah?
Oh, so they didn't have Wikipedia back then.
Well, okay, that's true. That's true. So, yes, Onoiki, who was the Tsuchikage, which is one of the military leaders in the Naruto universe, he is less known trivia. One of the 2 people in the entire Naruto universe that has a mustache. Like, literally. Even people that you're like, oh, they have facial hair. It's all beards. Nobody has mustaches. I don't know why. So it was really hard to find that. Overview of Naruto. The world of Naruto is separated into this fantasy nations area that does not seem to geographically match anywhere known in the world. So it really is just made up fantasy land. And there are the elemental nations, as they're called, because they're named after the elements. So you have the main 5 that are earth, fire, water, lightning, and wind. And then you have some others like snow and rice paddies and other things that exist that are not really elements, but okay. The main 5 are kind of the 5 primary superpowers of the Naruto world, and they have the Kages, the Hokage, the Tsuchikage, etc., who are the main military leaders, but the other nations will also kind of mimic the military structure of these main 5 nations in that way. These countries are technically ruled by a daimyo, so they're not military states. They're not ruled by the Kage, the whole nation. But the Kage has a lot of control over the sort of the military cities that exist in the states, the hidden cities. So the Hidden Leaf Village is where the main storyline is set, and the Kage has a lot of control over that city, even though civilians live in it, but the whole nation is not controlled by the Kage. It is not a military city or a military state situation. Ninja use, so unlike Mobile Suit Gundam, where we've got just an extension, almost fantasized of modern technology, this is really more magical. So we have a chakra system, they perform elemental attacks, and then it's a extension off of realistic ninja, like what ninjas in historical Japan would have used, kunai, shuriken, poisons, etc., except it is like fancy, magical, super speed versions of that kind of fighting. The ninja, so in Mobile Suit Gundam, the force existed to protect the Earth Federation. The EFSF existed to show military prowess against the colonies. In this, the ninja exists to show military prowess against the other elemental nations, but on a day-to-day, they also exist to help civilians. They have a lot of escort missions. They, at lower levels, they help paint fences and do other silly chores like that. So it's a very interesting split of responsibility. You have both the expectation for war and the expectation for almost good citizen, Samaritan type things for pay. Yeah. The general organization, at a young age, a child who has potential to be a ninja is invited or goes to the academy. The academy is different in different nations, but within the Leaf Village, we have this academy that exists at the bottom of the Hokage's tower, and the kids are trained in the various ninja arts by a ninja, usually a chunin, and they have written exams and physical exams, and if they graduate, it's around the age of 12 when they are given the genin exam in the Leaf Village, then they become a full-fledged ninja. They become a genin, and in the eyes of the ninja village, they also become an adult at the age of 12, which is really interesting for anyone who personally knows a 12-year-old. Okay, they are then assigned to Jonin senseis, which is another rank. Genin, Chunin, and Jonin are ranks that I'll get to in the next slide. And that Jonin sensei takes on a team of 3 and personally trains all 3 of them to be able to function in missions, to be able to act under the command of their captain, to learn greater techniques, etc., etc. It is also known that of all the Genin who graduate, only a couple graduate or are accepted by Jonin Sensei, which means every year you get a graduating class of ninjas of about 12 or 9 for the case of the main character's year, which for anyone that considers military, if you're only allowing 9 people to become members of your military every year, that's a functional military system. So there's some holes in the Naruto military organization. People will argue, but it's entirely headcanon, that, oh, well, the ones that get accepted by the Jonin sensei, they're basically in officer training. They're going towards that. They're not, the rest of them still have they have regular force training, which is an interesting concept and would have been a cool thing, except there's no evidence in the actual show that that's accurate and that exists, so. Both the magical techniques and the missions are given a ranking system in terms of difficulty from E, did I say from D? There is E, isn't there? E being the really, really easiest all the way up through S, which is the hardest. Most of them are around the D to A range, and depending on your rank, you are expected to only do certain levels of missions and techniques. The ranks are Genin, Chunin, Tokubetsu Jonin, which is basically someone who has a certain skill set that is at Jonin level, but the rest of their skills are not at Jonin level. And then Jonin Commander, this is a single person who is in charge of the military forces, basically. The Anbu, which is the special forces, the secret service type special, assassination squad thing. And the Kage, who is again a single person, the commander-in-chief, the one in charge of the military. For uniforms, they don't really seem to have one. There's a headband that you tie that has the symbol of your village on it, except some ninja are known to just not wear headbands, so I guess that's okay to not wear your uniform. There's no visual distinction between Genin and Jonin. Nothing. Some of them, we used to think in the early days of Naruto that the flak vest that they wore was something only Jonins were allowed, except Chunin also wore it. But then we were shown that anyone of any rank can wear it, because some Genin later in the show were shown to wear it. It's just a vest that holds things. So it'd be really interesting if that was a mark of rank. There's nothing whatsoever. It just seemed like characters just seem to know who the Jonin are and respect them, which is not how military works. Anbu, the special service, secret forces, I messed those two up, have a tattoo, and when they're on missions, they have a mask. Interesting that the people that are supposed to be super secret are given some permanent marker that they are a part of this really secret organization that, like any random, like something that might rip their clothes off would reveal them to everyone. And the medical corps are shown to have a uniform, which is useful. Your medical forces should have something to say, hey, I'm a healer and I'm here to help you. But why are they the only ones in the whole show that have uniforms? I don't know. So that was Naruto, which is an example of a really great idea with very poor execution. Now we have Fullmetal Alchemist, which is one of the best in this entire slide for military structure. Who's that?
Depends on which firm you're talking about.
Pure Bradley.
What?
Pure Bradley.
Yep, it's Bradley. Who I'm going to call king in this. Depends on your translation. He's the commander-in-chief of the military. This is a society that is a military state, so he is both president, dictator, king, because he is in charge of the military, but also therefore runs the entire nation. The primary setting of this anime is the military state of Amistris. I probably mispronounced that entirely. Which promotes itself as a parliamentary republic. That's what it says it is. It does not function as a parliamentary republic, and I don't want to spoil you guys, so we'll stop that. But it doesn't function as a parliamentary republic. The land is separated into several areas, which are cardinal directions. You have the south, the north, the east, the west, etc. And those all have a commander of the military in charge that then report back to Central, which is where Bradley is in charge and where many of the forces and tacticians kind of are headquartered. This is a very logical distribution, a very logical hierarchy system. The technology, so you have guns. You don't have super crazy technology. In fact, when there's like a tank that comes in later in the series and everyone else is like, whoa, that's like crazy high technology, right? So we're not quite there with everyone yet. There's no aircrafts, there's no aerial fighting at all, but there is alchemy. So state alchemists who fight in the military have basically a magic system. However, not everyone in the military is expected, or very few people in the military have this magical ability, unlike in Naruto where everyone was expected to have it. It's almost like Naruto is a society that is made up entirely of state alchemists, versus this is a society where the state alchemists have rank just within the overall military structure. The military purpose is to protect the nation from outside threats and also to keep the peace. They also act as the police force, which is very common for historical military states. The military is your police as well as it is your military force protecting against outside threats. The general organization, if you're interested in entering to the military, you must go through the military academy, unless you pass state inspection as an alchemist. That is the only way that you can get around kind of doing the typical military academy cadet situation. State alchemists, if they get accepted as a state alchemist to the military, come in at the rank of major. They skip it all. They're like immediately majors. This is used to great comedic effect within the show itself, because the main character doesn't act like a major. People a lot older, more experienced than him are ranked lower than him. So it's really interesting to see the mangaka really play with that idea, how kind of ridiculous it is. However, historically they were not in the canon, in the time frame. That is true. Historically they were not. They did not jump into the rank of major, so they had to work their way up the ranks like everyone else. So characters such as the Flame Alchemist, as I mentioned, Roy Mustang, started like everyone else. Military Academy worked his way up, and by the time he reached the rank of major, that kind of rule had been instated, but he worked his way up the ranks. Does that make sense? I said that 5 times. When you become a state alchemist, you are given a nickname by the president. that is unique from any other state alchemist. So we have the Full Metal Alchemist, the Strong Arm Alchemist, the Flame Alchemist, something like that, which is an interesting titling idea, basically. And it's totally landlocked, so there's not a Navy, an Air Force, an Army. There's just the one armed forces because there's no naval battles. It's totally landlocked, and again, there are no aircrafts. The ranks in this follow Army ranks, pretty much, from private all the way up to the commander of the Army, through captain, major, lieutenant colonel, etc. Again, like I said, you can see how much of a jump you get. If you get in as a state alchemist, you jump immediately up to major. It's a really big deal. There are career military people that never make major in their life. So it's an interesting system, and he gets some interesting situations, like the main character is 12. Is that right, when he becomes a state alchemist and becomes a major? Or is he 16? No, he's 16 in the anime, he's 12, right? Anyway. Uniforms. They have a really interesting uniform. It has a butt cape. I don't know what the purpose of that is for fighting, but it exists. And the jacket and the pants are all very uniform. They're all blue. Stars on the shoulder seem to designate rank. I can't tell because most of the show really focuses around those in higher ranks, if they where rank is designated for much lower ranks, but it seems to all be based on how many stars they have for higher ranks. And then there is the medals of honor and ribbons on the breast that designate sort of honorable wounds, etc., all that stuff. And you can tell, like the mangaka did, or whoever, no, it would have been the mangaka originally, you can tell that she gave some thought as to who would have whatever level of ribbon. Like some of the characters you can see, Roy Mustang has significantly more medals of honor ribbons than other characters depicted next to him. Never really describes what they are, but they exist. And that was Full Metal Alchemist. In my opinion, it does the military structure really well because it is a already pre-existing military structure that works and then adds a magical element to it. There is, again, some ridiculous parts of that magical element being added, but that ridiculousness is addressed in world, which is interesting. Now let's talk about Bleach, which is what I'm cosplaying from. 2001, August 2001 is when it started. Anyone know that mustache? Who knows?
Oh.
What?
Gary Bradley.
Oh, it's that guy.
Yeah, the look of the Sahara show.
Yeah.
Tess,
Something like that.
You got it, you're so close. Tessai.
Tess.
Yeah.
Who wants to watch Bleach?
It's Tessai. He's just a humble employee of the Urahara shop. It's not a captain. It's just a humble employee. Spoilers. Bleach oscillates between the real world and Soul Society, this magical dead world, the world of the dead. In Soul Society, we have two sort of sections of land. We have Rukongai, which is where most dead souls go and live in very kind of normal peasant-like lives. And then we have Seirete, which is the city, the white city, where the upper class, the nobility, and the military, the Soul Reapers, the Shinigami, live. Interesting, this is just a world building thing. This doesn't have anything to do with military, but for some reason, in this world, when you die, you live a whole life. So you die at the same age that you come at the same age that you were when you died, and yet you continue to live, but you can never die, I guess, in this world. And also, the nobility exists and can have children. Like, you can have kids as a dead soul. So they're souls that are born already dead. Okay, cool. So there's also a kingdom in the sky, a palace in the sky, I guess somewhere in a different dimension, which is the Soul Kings. palace where only the best of the best go. That is Division 0. They're the best of the best. And the Soul King supposedly is in charge of all of Soul Society. In reality, Soul Society is very much run by the Captain Commander, who is in charge of the military, and the Central 46, who are the kind of parliament that are the representations of the people, even though they're all nobles, because that's how that happens. To become a Shinigami, you have to, this is similar to Naruto, you have to have the ability to use Reiatsu, which is the magical system. And if you're shown to have the ability to use it, and there's a very easy kind of test for that, anyone with Reiatsu will get hungry in Soul Society, and people who don't ever need to eat. So if you get hungry and you start to die of starvation, then you are sent to the Spiritual Arts Academy, the Shinigami Academy, and there you train to be a Shinigami, and depending on how well you do, you kind of get to send in your request for what division you will then go into within the Shinigami forces. So there's 3 major options. You can become part of the divisions, which is the Gotei 13. You can become part of the Kido Corps, and you can become part of the Onmitsukido. I'm not gonna try to say that fast. Which is basically like the Anbu, kind of the secret special forces of the Shinigami forces. The Kido Corps are the specialized kind of super magical forces. They're the ones that specialize in Kido, which is the spell casting of this universe. And then the Gotei 13 are separated into 13 divisions, going from Division 1 to Division 13. Division 1 is run by the Captain Commander, and every other division is run by a captain. And some of them have specialities. Division 4 is the healers,
Yeah.
right? Division...
What was the freaky poison berry?
Science. Division 12 are the scientists. However, that was literally created by Urahara because he liked science and wanted it. So it seems that captains have pretty much total control over their divisions, which is a little confusing. And I like the concept of this world, but if I were creating it, I would give all the divisions a speciality and kind of roll with it from there instead of only making a couple. The ranks in this world, there seems to be no ranks for non-officers. And then officers, who are called seated, go from the 20th seat, which is the lowest ranking officer, all the way up through the captain, and then the captain commander is the single person that runs over them. So the captain is first seat, the lieutenant is second seat, they're just known as captain and lieutenant, and everyone else is just a seat. The uniforms are, everyone wears this black mofuku, which is a traditional mourning garb for traditional Japanese. The lieutenants wear a badge around their arm, and that badge has a wooden shield that has the symbol of their division. You can kind of see Renji's right there. And then the captains wear a white vest thing over their outfit that has the number of their division on the back of it. There seems to be no way to signify 3rd seat through 20th seat. They don't have like a number anywhere. People just know who they're... I mean, I guess I would understand knowing who your 3rd seat is, but I don't know who 20th seat is. Like that's a thing. So yeah, so Bleach, we'll get here. Bleach is an example of a very good solid foundation, better than Naruto, that again broke down in execution, could have been developed more for military structure and failed in that execution. Then we'll go with Attack on Titan, which was published in 2009. Who's that mustache? Okay, you all know this one. Commander Pixis. He is the highest ranking officer of the garrison, which is one of the 3 divisions that exist in the Attack on Titan universe, and it's an interesting dude. The primary setting of this, we'll go early with all of these, no spoilers, as much as you can. The primary setting of this is within this walled city state. There are 3 levels of walls. The outermost wall much bigger and has kind of more of the farmland and the villages living out there, and then you go into the innermost wall where you get a little bit more of the populated villa city, and then the innermost wall, which is where all the nobility and the royalty live. The majority of military tech in this, so there's no magic-ish, the majority of military tech in this relies on kind of a pulley system and swords, but it's almost ninja-like in the sense that because of their weird pulley system gear, they are able to kind of come at the enemy from above and the side, almost flying in a sense, but then just using swords and horses. What? Yeah. And then there are these crazy creatures called titans, which are basically really huge, ugly things that are trying to attack them. So the function of the military within this story is in three parts, because the three divisions of the military in this story have three different functions. One of the divisions' function is to go out and scout and gain information and deal with titans outside the wall. One of the military's function is to guard the walls and therefore attack titans who are trying to invade. And one of the military's function is the military police. So again, we have kind of a military state society that pretends that it isn't a military state society because it is also a monarchy. But the police force is a part of the military. So again, those are the survey corps, the garrison, and the military police. Each is led by a commander who is in charge, and all three of those commanders is led by the commander-in-chief. Recruits are all trained together. They're known as the training corps, and then depending on how well they do in their training, they're given some level of choice into what of the three divisions they are able to go into after that. And I already explained the rest of that. So the ranks are like pretend ranks that exist without a bunch of the ranks in between. So we go from trainee to cadet to elite to lance corporal to sergeant to captain to sergeant major to commander-in-chief. That's missing a lot of ranks, like a lot of ranks. But those are the only ranks we ever hear about. So. The uniforms, they've got this interesting crop top jacket, the function of which I don't entirely understand, realistically, which has the symbol of the division that they are in, both on the breast and on the back. They have harnesses, which help with the pulley system that they're using, the maneuvering gear, and they have these weird leather skirt things. I don't know what the function of those are either. And then they wear white pants, despite the fact that they ride horses and are in the military. Why would you ever make white your military uniform? I mean, by the time they got back from like a week-long expedition outside the wall, those pants should be brown. Like, I doubt they have time to change very often when they're out, whatever. The only sign of rank that we get at all is that all three of the commanders seem to wear this, like, you see the second from the left, Erwin, those of you who know, he has this weird tassel thing. Is that right? Which is what all the commanders seem to wear, because that's a symbol of rank, and we have no idea what anyone else's rank is by their uniforms. So Attack on Titan is an example of I don't want to be like everyone else and use a real military, but it's going to have a real military structure. But then because I'm not like anyone else and I didn't add anything of my own to really fit in, it just doesn't make sense. And those are all the types of militaries that exist in fiction. So, this is where we discuss. Anyone have any thoughts, questions? And then we'll get to my discussion questions. Anyone have anything they want to start off with? Nada?
Which one's your favorite? I mean, of the military systems.
Of those five?
Yeah. Maybe you have a preference. I mean, they're kind of different in certain ways. And
Yeah.
Is the structure, but I mean,
So, Fullmetal Alchemist is my favorite for realistic military action and the way that they kind of behave within the ranks is very realistic, and I enjoy it. However, it is also not a created system, so I do have to give props for something like Bleach, who is, tries to create their own system, or Naruto, in a sense, trying to create their own system. There are better created military systems out there than those two. But yeah, Full Metal Alchemist is my favorite of those. Yeah.
Did you ever see Full Metal Panic?
No.
No, it's okay.
I mean, I've seen some, but I haven't seen enough
I don't
to talk
remember the
about
details
it.
that much, but yeah, that was the Russian army commanded by like just a 16-year-old girl because of the anime.
Yeah. Anime does weird things with military. A really interesting example of a military structure that was almost entirely created, that I enjoy for the most part is Star Trek. So again, it's like an expansion on modern military, but the way their divisions are run with the science officers versus the medical staff and the different colored shirts, which in the original show were very, there wasn't a lot of consistency between who's wearing what color at any given time, but within the modern reboot, they really have tried to make that more consistent. But if you think about the function of that, the function of those ranks, I do like the Star Trek universe for a science fiction military structure. Especially because one of the interesting things about the Star Trek universe, if we're going with, original generation, so the Enterprise, the purpose of the Enterprise is an exploratory vessel. They're the flagship ship. But they're primarily science exploratory. They occasionally pick up, escort things, etc. But their purpose is to go out. They're to scout. They're to see the things that no one's seen before, etc. I can say the intro. Which is really interesting to have a military structure where you're following not the basic military thing, because you very easily could have written a Star Trek universe ship that you're following that is just on the front line of the war against the Klingons, and dealing with that, and it's fun to see, because that is true of many military organizations. Not every unit is going to be on the front lines. They're not going to be doing the typical military thing all the time, I guess. What are your favorite fictional militaries? Anyone have one that's not been mentioned?
There's a favorite, Nerve. It's not really a military as such.
I think that's a paramilitary.
Yeah, but the structure like one.
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen it or read it, whatever that is. but cool. I believe you. That's cool.
Wasn't taken on by the actual military thing.
Yeah. How about, I'm going to branch off from that. So one of the things that people do when they're creating a fictional military, it's not a bad thing to structure it off of militaries that exist, that are shown to function, right? Because that way you can be sure that you're making something that would potentially actually function. Most people nowadays are structuring their fictional militaries off of the modern military. There's a lot of types of military that has existed in history that are not the modern military. We can think the Roman army had a very different command structure from the modern army, and yet functioned obviously for a very long time and very successfully. So that's something that could be used. The Spartan army is another thing that can be used. The Trojan army, which had slightly different military structures from each other. Anyone have another example of a historical military structure?
What about the old-timey Japan army? And it was dozens of warlords all fighting each other.
Yeah, the warlord system.
I don't know about it.
Yeah,
What about now?
Yeah, there's a million animes about it.
yeah.
It's a really good, gender-bent version of the history. About what a guy who went to time travel.
Interesting. Yeah. Also, the Mongol army was really successful, and they were kind of a warlord system, sort of. The Vikings had a very different military system, and there's a lot out there. If you're ever thinking of writing a military system, there's a lot out there to inspire you. Do you prefer the like super fictionalized military like Naruto or Bleach, or do you prefer the more realistic military? Raise your hand for really fictional military. I raise your hand for realistic military. Interesting.
Depends on how it's presented and how it's structured.
Have you seen Yojo Senki?
Mm-mm.
That's another really good one.
Is it? Is it a fictional-ish military
The
or?
saga with Kage
It's
Visual.
the quote-unquote.
Yeah, that's cool. That's like,
Okay.
it's like World War I with magic, basically.
Okay.
It's slick.
I think the last time I gave this panel, I think someone mentioned that actually. Yeah.
It's right.
Speaking of like real wars, but I really love alternate history where you're taking real wars, real situations, and making it different. This is a Western novel, but the Temeraire Chronicles, the Temeraire series, is the Napoleonic Wars, but with dragons, which is really interesting for two reasons. One, you've got dragons, which is really cool, but two, the dragons in the Temeraire system function as aircrafts, which means you have a Napoleonic War, but with air warfare, which totally changes the layout of that actual war system, and the tactics that went on in the Napoleonic War. So I think that's really interesting. Who's your favorite military commander?
I'd say General Hughes.
Mm-hmm.
Mustang.
Mustang. Anyone else? Mm-hmm.
So this has nothing to do with that question, but I was just having this conversation with my sister about her favorite fictional military. And I told her, well, Blue Exorcist is kind of like a military structure right there. And I was like, and she like looked at me like, oh my God. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Because I mean, the Exorcists are ranked, and they have like
Yeah.
classes that are like visibly showing the rankings, and they're trained at what's basically like an academy.
Yeah, no, definitely. Any sort of, and this is the interesting thing about the intersection between military and police forces, which that kind of thing I would have called it more of a like magical police force, I guess, but you could call it either way because it is this, that you have this ranking system, you have this very visible uniform system that denotes ranking and things of that nature. I have no other thoughts about that. I just think that's interesting. That's cool. Any other favorite military commanders or anything else? We have about 10 minutes.
I can't quite put my finger on the name of the actual anime. There was one about like this really reluctant soldier who was a pacifist.
I'm gonna break
He was
this
moving up-
table.
It was a fantasy one. I can't remember it.
Ooh,
No, it's
soldier. Rurouni Kenshin.
no.
If that's
It,
it
like I
describes
said, he was a
that.
really reluctant / lazy pacifist soldier, and he gets dragged
That's
along.
still Rurouni Kenshin.
Yeah, so he gets dragged along into it. And he's a brilliant strategist.
Oh, that sounds interesting. If you think of the name, let me know.
Okay.
Message me on one of my various social media. Rurouni Kenshin is a really great historical drama anime of sorts for the idea of the veteran coming back who doesn't really know how to function as society is changing, which I think is really interesting. Doesn't know how to deal with the way that war has changed him and has changed everyone, and how like no one is coming off of it in the same way that he is. It was a very vague thing. I like Rurouni Kenshin. It's also the very realistic depiction of the fall of is it the fall of the Meiji or the rise of the Meiji era? It's one of the two. Rise of the Meiji era?
I
Yeah.
didn't put the Shinsengumi on it.
Yeah.
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 That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Cool. This is early. Usually I ramble a little bit more in between slides, but I didn't. Bam, I hit them. Any other comments? Questions, concerns, statements?
Favorite concepts for military, like favorite concepts and scenarios that you get put into, like fantasy versus modern and stuff? I
Yeah.
would just see the dynamic with that, like how well you either curb stomp them, or how they would adapt, or anything, or how they would take the technology if they were found them, if the fantasy would find the technology and see what they would do with it, but then they wouldn't understand that well, but they'd still get it.
I think that, so this is very interesting, and there's a realistic, or there's a historical kind of thing you could look at if you're interested in what happens in societies where greater technology is coming in against older technology, and the Native Americans are a great thing to look at because people think like, oh, the colonies, they came in and the Native Americans were wiped out, right? Which it's such a very basic way to say like a thing that happened over hundreds and hundreds of years and primarily happened because of disease. The reason so many Native American cultures were wiped out was because of the fact that in Europe and Asia there was a lot more domesticated animals, and because it was all interconnected, there was a lot more sharing of disease across a lot larger of a continental area. So the immunities that people had built up by the time they came over to the Americas, which is an area that didn't have as many domesticated animals, which didn't have as much transference of disease, and therefore all of those diseases they came over basically wiped out. I mean, there's records that there were native cities of over 100,000 people, which is way more than what you got. I mean, there's potentially cities that were even up to 1 million people, which is significantly more than what you got in any European city at that time. So even though people will say, well, it would have happened anyway, even if they weren't wiped out from disease, because like Europe had guns, but no, when you have a couple small armies coming over with guns and entire civilizations who already have their organized army system with their swords and their blow darts and whatever, so stereotypical, those early colonists could not defeat the native. It didn't matter the guns that they have. They weren't able, they were at the mercy of the natives in those situations. And when they saw the guns that were introduced, they were very interested. It wasn't like, what is this strange magical device? There is a lot of record of early colonists trading guns to the natives for supplies to survive the winter. There are records of guns traveling all the way to the West Coast way before colonists got over to the West Coast, because natives had a very large interconnected trading organization. In fact, before the colonists ever came, there are archaeological records of things that were created by the Lakota, for instance, being all the way up in New England, because it wasn't this perception of like these tiny little civil, camps that like didn't talk to each other and were very unorganized. Really, if it weren't for the fact that disease wiped out most of the native population in the Americas, we would have had a very different history here in the Americas. It had nothing to do, it had little to do with technology, because by the time that the colonies were like, we want to expand, natives had already been accustomed and knew what guns were for years and years and years, because they had traded for them, they had learned the mechanisms. And guns that day, like guns back then weren't that powerful in comparison, so that was a rant that had not really anything to do with, but I think that's interesting to to consider the fact that there's way more intersection than just this technology is so much better, right?
Just to see how the magic system works against the technological system as well.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. So J.K. Rowling, for instance, with the Harry Potter series, totally went away from that, because she was like, oh, technology doesn't work amongst magic. Like, magic makes technology go haywire. That's why we don't have phones at Hogwarts, right?
It's probably the wards.
Yeah.
It's probably a good theory, though. It's probably just the wards.
Yeah.
Trains seem to work pretty fine.
Yes.
Mechanical.
And there's nothing that has suggested, for instance, Arthur Weasley is able to enchant the car to be able to move. So like that suggests.
That's electrical systems in it as well. So
yeah.
It's clearly not interfering with it. And guns are completely mechanical. So.
Exactly. So there is no reason why magic would interfere with that kind of warfare. I mean, in J.K. Rowling's system, wizards would lose against modern weapons.
God, awful.
Really, with the exception, there's a couple theories that I've heard that if wizards were smart about it, the only reason they wouldn't potentially lose would be because of Imperius. That's the only thing they have that Muggles do not have, the ability to control people's minds and action to this like really crazy degree, if they could get their hands on a president, on a military commander, someone who's in charge of making decisions early on in the potential war against Muggles and wizards, and imperious them to do something in such a way that would really harm the Muggle
But then again,
forces. Well, but you have to draw your wand and say Expelliarmus, and then time it takes someone to cock a gun and shoot you.
Yeah.
You're not going to get there in time.
Unless you were good at nonverbal spells.
And can do it wandlessly, right? Which is like, what, like a 1% potential of the entire wizarding population?
Between all the wizarding families, their IQs are pretty low.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. But it would be interesting to write a story wherein you have a magic system that is potentially destructive enough to fight equally against a modern mechanical system. That would be really interesting.
and then there'll probably be other ones defecting over to where they, for the originally came from, what they grew up with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting thought.
It was all the merit on the sky.
Say it again?
All the merit on the sky.
All the Merit in the Sky. I'll look it up.
It might be pronounced differently, but.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, we're basically at the end. If you want to come up and talk to me more, totally. But thank you so much for coming. And I hope you enjoyed this very, I don't know, college presentation panel in cosplay.